What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over Anim Montages, or Animation Montages. Now, in all my series to this point, you've seen that I've used a lot of state machines within my animation blueprints to get our characters to animate the way we want. Sometimes, however, we want to use something called Anim Montages. These Anim Montages can be several animations put together to make one final animation. They can also be an animation that has a section that loops, such as when we are reloading a weapon, and we have to reload one shell, one cartridge at a time. So for example, with this shotgun, we may want to reload one shell at a time, and the shell amount that we have to load into the shotgun could be variable based on how many shots the player or the character has used. So sometimes I might reload 3 shells, sometimes I might reload 4, 5, 6, maybe I just reload 1. You could technically just have a bunch of different states to reload as many times as you need, but you could also have a looping section on the reload so that when you play this anim montage, it plays for as many times as you need, and this is just one animation. You don't have like 18 different animations for reloading the shotgun. Let's see this in action. So let's say I've shot 5 projectiles. I normally have 12, so instead of having 12, I now have 7 available shots in my weapon. At this point, if I reload and say this is a weapon, like a repeater or a shotgun where we have to reload them individually, and I can stop at any point, what should happen is if I press reload, I want to replay that animation where I'm putting in a singular shell or singular cartridge as many times as I need. In this case, I have it hard-coded to 5 because this is just an example of what anim montages can be used for. Let's say I reload. Now, it's going to play this animation, and I'm looping the part where the character is putting that back into their gun. Your animation could be a lot smoother than mine, but you see I completed and I reached my 12 ammo. In this case, as I said, if I shoot even just 1 bullet, and I am to reload, you can see it is going to repeat the 5 times. So right now it isn't based on the ammo. Again, this is just a demonstration on using anim montages, creating them, setting them up, calling them, starting them from different spots, all that good stuff. I am doing it in this series today, but you can use this anywhere. I am going to have our own episode within the first-person shooter tutorial specifically that covers this and covers it for our weapons. This is just an example on anim montages. Also, these can be done in code or blueprint. Now, within the series, I'm going to do a lot of it in code, but in today's episode, we're going to do it in blueprint. So you get to see both methods. I want to give a huge shout out to all my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys for the love and support for everything that you do. So incredibly grateful. Glad you guys are enjoying the series and excited to see what you all come up with in your projects. If you'd like to follow some of the mechanics and functionality we've set up in the first-person shooter tutorial series, I will link you to the playlist right here. You can check out everything we've done. You'll be able to perform all the logic that you saw in this episode right here. Alternatively, if you just care about the anim montages, I will show you how we set up the animations initially through the state machine, if you're curious about the differences between that one and this one. That'll be in this iCard right here in the top right corner. To make a montage, we're going to need animations. We need at least one animation. In fact, I'm only going to be using one animation, and I'm going to chop it up. But you can comprise an anim montage of many animations. So make sure you have animations for your reload, or really it doesn't matter for this, whatever you want, whatever you're testing and creating an anim montage for. For me, I have it in this folder. So I go to where I have my animations, and I have this reload animation. I have ybot generic reload. Ybot is my skeleton, and this is the animation. So the character just goes, reloads their weapon, and goes back to the idle stance. Perfect. Now, what I want to do is create an anim montage for this animation. If you right-click anywhere in the content browser, or click Add, either way will work, go to Animation, and go to Animation Montage. Once you do this, you'll go ahead and create an anim montage asset with the skeleton you select. So we're going to pick our skeleton. I've got a lot in here because of my weapons have skeletons, and I also have a few different character skeletons and enemy skeletons. you're going to pick the skeleton for the character that you want to perform the montage on. So my playable character is the Ybot, and that's the character that's going to have the montage today, so I want to use the Ybot skeleton. Once you do this, you'll get a montage and you'll name it whatever you want. I called mine Repeating Reload Montage. I'll show you that one, but I'll also go ahead and make a new one with you live. So I'll just call this one Alternate Reload Montage. And we'll go ahead and save that. Now, let's go into the montage that we made. This is the one that I've already made and set up. So you can kind of see here that I have a bunch of stuff in here that you won't have. That's why we're going to do one live, because there's a lot going on here. Yours will look like this, or something similar to this. This tutorial will work in Unreal Engine 4 as well, so don't fret if you're using that and not Unreal Engine 5 like I'm using. The only main difference is that this will look slightly different, but actually everything is pretty much the exact same, just visually it's different. Now, when we come in here, you may have an animation like I have here, and that is only because I had the reload animation playing prior, so it's playing on the skeleton. You'll see there's actually no animation in here, so it's okay if yours is just T-posing or not doing anything at all. What you want to do is drag in the animations that will make up your reload montage. So for me, like I said, I'm actually just going to use one, and I have Ybot generic reload. You can put it in the default slot area here. Slots can be used for things like if you want to play this animation while you're standing, crouched, or prone, so they can be different based on your character's state, but still be very similar, or even the same animation just with different parts of the body or different bones depending on how it is that you set up your characters. Right now we're not going to be getting into that. That's a little bit more advanced than today's episode. We're just going over the basics. So you're just going to put your animation in your default slot here. Now, when you have this, you can actually put in multiple animations. So, like what I did in my other one that I was showing you, let's go back to that one. You'll see I have technically 3 animations in here, but really they're all the same animation that I've just split up. You don't even have to do that. If you only have one animation that you're splitting sections into, you can actually just use this one animation. It's not really more complicated either way if you're using one animation or multiple animations. So in this alternate montage, the one we're doing live, I'll show you just one animation. In the other montage, I will show you how I split it up into several animations. Now, you can click on your animation in this little graph here, and you'll get some information about the start time, the end time, the play rate, all that good stuff. You can feel free to change this if you want, but it's not really required, especially when we're only dealing with one animation. You just configure it to your liking. Nothing here has to be done. What we want to do is determine what parts of our animation should be sectioned off. So for example, what is like the startup of our reload, what is the actual reload operation, and what is the finishing of our reload. This can just be a manual process. If you just have one animation, I can say like up to here is the start, and what I want to loop is after that, right? I probably want to loop this part, something like that. So if we're going to actually figure this out, I would say about frame 19, you can read the number right here, is the finish of the start animation. What we want to do is kind of label these so that we know exactly where we're at. Right click that and select new montage selection. Now you can type in a name. So I'm going to say start reload. Going to actually delete the default one here. You can use it if you want, but just better if we know exactly what all of our names are. So I'm going to have start reload. Now this section is going to be applied as soon as the animation hits the frame that the start reload is on. Since this is our beginning montage section, it is going to always default at frame 0. You'll see even if I'm moving it, it is defaulting back to frame 0. That's fine though, because this is going to play for as long as we need until we reach the next section. If we don't put another section in, it's just going to play the whole time. Like I said, at frame 19, that is where I want to start looping the actual reloading section. So this is where we're putting in like one shell, one cartridge at a time. Really frame 20, because I think frame 19 is still part of the startup of the reload. So we'll go to frame 20. Right click at the top here, make a new montage section, and we're going to say something like loop reload. And now what's going to happen is we're going to start from here. Once we reach frame 20, we're entering the loop reload state. And I think it actually put on frame 22, so let's back it up a little bit. Somewhere along there is probably good. Now we want to determine where the loop reload will end so that we can keep looping only that section. So I'm going to play, and maybe like right about there. It's even a little bit too far. Probably like here. With the animation I'm working with, this is probably good enough for the loop. We'll want to finish the animation after this. So let's add another montage section. And we'll call this end reload. And now we have 3 sections on our montage. We have a start, a loop, and an end. Right now it doesn't seem that anything has changed. I mean, we're just labeling these sections, but really everything is exactly the same as it was. Now what we have to do is determine the order that these should play in. And you're like, well, yeah, obviously they should play in the order like start, loop, reload. Now what you want to do is find your montage sections tab. It should be next to your asset browser by default, but it might not be, especially if you've played around with this before. You might have moved it. Just find it, select it, you'll bring this up. If you can't find it, you can go to Window, and then search for it in this list. We want Montage Sections. Click it, and as long as it's checked, it will come up. You can also just click it to disable it, and click it again to enable it, and it will definitely come up. Once you have this, it looks pretty weird. You're like, what is this? What it's doing is it's telling you you can preview from your states. If we play it, you can preview from your states and you can actually determine the order that this is going to go in. So right now it just goes from start to loop to end. Really what we want to do is for it to go to start to loop to loop. By telling it to go from loop to loop, it's going to know to stop and continuously loop this section. So how you can do that is click on the arrow. So start goes into loop reload. That's technically how it was already set up. But loop reload should not go to end reload. It should go into loop reload again. This is now going to have a little like replay symbol here. And so if you preview this section, it's going to do start and then it's going to continuously loop. You can also preview the end reload section, and that's what it looks like when it finishes. So now we have it set up. It'll play the montage, it'll go to the loop, the end of the loop section, and then it'll only return back to the start of the loop section. Perfect. At this point, we now have a looping section within our montage. Even though we're only using one animation, we can loop a particular section, and thus we are able to control more about our animation than we would with just the state machine. At this point, you can also add notifies. You'll see notifies, and then you'll see like the number 1 here. This is the first notify track. So you can go right-click on the one with a number, and then add notify. Make a new notify, just like you would with an animation in the state machine. You know, same with any animation. And we can make a notify name, such as, begin looping reload. You can call it like filling up ammo, whatever, really. Let's call it filling ammo, something like that. Because really, this is going to be a notify that does logic within our character, within our game. So we're going to know, at this point, we've begun filling our ammo. Probably want to put it at like the last frame of the loop instead of the first. Otherwise, you'll fill up ammo immediately upon looping, which is a little silly. We'd probably want to wait until the character fully put in the cartridge. You can put this anim notify on the frame that the loop finishes or a frame or two before if you want, but the loop will go to the frame that end reload is on and stop there. So if you preview, you can see exactly where you're going to go. You'll see that the loop does hit the filling ammo notify. To be extra safe, like I said, you could put it just before so that you know that the notify is hit. And there we go. Now, every time the animation loops, it's going to call this event. So now we can do actual logic within our character or our animation blueprint to do really whatever. In this case, we're trying to fill up ammo, reload ammo a little at a time. That specific operation with reloading ammo is going to be covered in the first-person shooter episode where we go over montages because it's very involved. We have our reload system already, and we're going to modify it to support this. We're not going into something that deep in this episode. This will be logic that you have in your project that is specific to whatever you're trying to do. That's where you're going to do it. But for now, we're just going to create a basic event that's essentially just going to have a running counter, and then we're going to use that counter to determine how many times to loop. Before we do that, let's quickly go into our other Anim montage. You'll see that I had the exact same setup. The only difference is that I have 3 different animations. Really, I have the same animation, just broken up into 3. If you do want to combine multiple animations like this, what you can do is have your animations in this default slot. You can either set their end time automatically or just trim the animation or move the animation around to where you want it. You want to just put your sections at each one of the animations most likely. So like my start, this is my start animation. My loop, this is my looping part of my animation. And then my finish is the ending of my reload animation. I also have a notify in here, and this one I called added ammo, but again, it doesn't matter what you call it. Just as long as you know what you called it, it's fine. So that's the only difference. If you're doing multiple animations, that's how you could work with it. But since we did this one live, we'll be continuing with this montage. So you don't have to make 2, don't worry. Just showing you how it could work with either of them. Now, to fill out in Anim notifies logic, you can do it the same as you do it with any other animation. If you've done it before, you'll know how to do this, but if not, I'll cover it here. We can go into our animation blueprint, and we can go to our event graph. Once you do that, the event graph will take all the animations that are part of the skeleton, and you will be able to search for that and notify. So in that case, I was doing added ammo, but we have a new one now in our other reload montage, which is called filling ammo. And so we can search for filling ammo and pull this up. Whatever you called it, doesn't matter. Just get this event here. And I'll just combine these events together so that either one can do the same operation. But like I said, you only need 1. This is just for the tutorial that I have 2. Don't need 2. Now, if you are following this episode and you've also been following my first-person shooter tutorial series, you're going to have a little bit of an issue with this because you have this reload state from the default state machine. So I'd recommend temporarily just disconnecting the transition rule, idle to reload. Just disconnect is reloading so it can't go into this state. If you do this, it'll make sure that we don't use the state machine's reloading. We're using our Anim montage when we set up the rest of the logic. So you won't be confused by that. This will give you a warning because idle to reload can never be taken. But again, this is just temporary, just for the sake of learning about montages. You can enable it again at the end of this episode. Won't hurt anything. So just temporarily disable that. Now let's go in the event graph where we have our event. And let's determine the logic that we want to happen when this Anim notify is called. Remember, this is filling ammo. So every time this is done, technically what we want to do is add a bullet into this weapon. Right? We've added another shell or cartridge. At this point, like I said, we're not going into anything that complicated because that will be covered within the actual first-person shooter series. So I'm just going to have a random variable that I'm going to create called reload counter. And I'm going to have an arbitrary number such as 5. We're going to let it run this many times, and once it reaches the maximum amount, we will call the end repeating reload function, which allows us to finish the animation. If we go into the character that we're going to be controlling and playing this animation on, such as our base character BP, we can go into our event graph and make a variable. I'm going to call it the reload counter. You can make a variable by pressing the plus here, and I'm going to make sure that it is the integer type. Again, I called it reload counter. By default, I'm having it as 0. You don't have to do anything with this variable prior. We're going to let the event in the AnimBP take care of it, but just make sure it's here and click the little eyeball so that it is public and instance editable. That's really what clicking this means. If you click it, makes it so that it can be seen and then it's instance editable. You can do it through here as well. It doesn't have to be the eyeball. Just as long as it's instance editable, you will be able to visualize it in the AnimBP. That's where we're going to grab it to increment it. So now in our event within the AnimBP, we can grab our character reference that we have, basically the character that's controlling this animation blueprint or the parent of it. Be able to drag off of that now and search for your new variable, which will be get reload counter. You can then drag off the variable to increment it, or just add one to it, whatever you want to do. Increment is easier in this case, so we can just call increment int. Pass your event into it like I've done here. You can drag off of the increment. This will get you the new value. And I'm just going to check if it's greater than or equal to 5, meaning that we've looped this or we've added 5 ammo to our weapon. In the case of actually using this within your game, what you do is make sure that it's greater than or equal to the maximum amount of ammo that your weapon can currently hold. It wouldn't be an arbitrary number such as 5, but again, we're not going into all that logic right now, so it can be arbitrary for this example. We go into a branch like this, and we determine that the reload counter is greater than or equal to 5. We're finally able to end the reload. So what I've done is created an event that will both start and end this reload. Do that in the base character BP. So in the actual first-person shooter series, I'm using code to listen for my inputs. But for this episode, I'm just going to do a quick override in the blueprint to make this as simple as possible and show you how to do it in the blueprints instead of in the code. So if you go to Edit, Project Settings, scroll down to Input, go to your action mappings. I have one called Reload, which occurs when I press the R key. Set this up now if you haven't already. You can just add one by pressing the plus here, type in the name, and then select the key, which for me is the R key. Once you do that, if you're in a character, you will be able to pick up an input action event. So you search for the name of it, such as reload. Once you have it in here, what you're going to make sure you do is you uncheck override parent binding. If you've been following the first person shooter series, if you don't do that, then this blueprint one will never be taken, the code one will be taken. Or vice versa, technically the blueprint one could be taken over the code one if you did some differences in your logic than mine. But I'd recommend just unchecking this anyway. That way you know for sure that the blueprint one will be called, or can be called. On pressed of it, we want to start the reloading montage because we are no longer doing it through the AnimBP state machine. We're going to actually trigger these montages on certain events. In this case, we're going to do it when we press the reload button. There'll be other conditions in here because we want to make sure, like the same conditions that we have already, like, oh, if we're sprinting, we can't reload without stopping sprinting, that sort of stuff. We'll still want to do that. But again, basic example, not worried about all that right now. So we press this and we want to play the montage of the repeating reload. To do this, you can right click and type play montage and select the play montage node. You need a skeletal mesh component. My character in this specific series has 2 meshes because I have the mesh that exists in the actual world that other people can see and the mesh that they will be able to see, the actual player controlling them. The mesh that we want to do it on is the character mesh here. But whatever mesh you're using is perfectly fine. You may need to actually do 2, one for the character that the other players are seeing and one for the player that is controlling that character. So you might have 2 montages that you have to play depending on your setup. But basically, just use the mesh that you want to play the animation on. For me, that is character mesh. You can actually just drag it in, or you could right-click and get that mesh. Doesn't matter which way you do it. That's your in-skeletal mesh component because that's the skeletal mesh we're going to be playing the animation on. Now, the only other thing we have to do is select the montage we want to play. In this example, I'm actually going to do the alternate reload montage, which is the one we made live. previously I had my other one that I made. But we'll go ahead and do this new one that we just made to show you that it works. Now you have a bunch of output nodes here, so you can do a bunch of stuff if any of these come true, but we don't actually need to do that for today's example. Basically, we're just going to let this montage play. It should loop. Once it loops enough times, we'll call the end repeating reload event, which will then go and play the rest of the montage, the finish reloading section. And then we'll reset our reload counter so we can do it again. So what we want to do here is go into our Anim BP again. And if you tested this, you'll notice that your animation montage wasn't actually playing. This part's a little weird, but you want to actually go into your Anim graph. You don't want to go into your state machine this time. You want to go into your Anim graph. And there's something here that usually goes from the default state machine to the output pose. Now, mine's a little bit more complicated, and again, you'll know what this is if you've been following the first-person shooter series, but it's okay if you don't. You don't actually need anything I've got here. Everything that's highlighted, you won't need. If you have it, great. Keep it. We're not getting rid of it. It doesn't need to go for this change. In fact, it's actually better to have this stuff in here for our series. But you can ignore it if you don't have it. Essentially, we have our default state machine, and this is whatever actually is going on in here. Additionally, to the state machine, I was doing some logic to be able to rotate the character's mesh based on the direction we were looking. So if we're looking up or down, the character is actually rotating and some of their bones are being modified to allow them to look up or down as well. Then I was converting the result that we get to the space we need for the output pose. And that's what we had before. I'm doing one additional thing here, and that is I'm adding this slot, default slot, before the output pose. Now, in our Anim Montage, remember I said we have this default slot, and you could add more for like standing, crouching, prone? That's what we need to do. Basically, depending on what slot you're in, or depending on what state you're in, if you're standing, crouching, prone, you need to apply the correct slot to the output pose. This will really help us know what animations we need to play on this Anim Montage. In my case, I only have the one, so I just added default slot. You literally can just type in default slot. And you'll take whatever you had before, pass it into that as the source, and then pass that into the output pose. So if you don't have all this extra stuff in here, you just have your state machine, pass that into the source, and then pass that result into the output pose. Once you do this, you'll be able to see that now your Anim Montage will play, and we can test this because I've actually set it up to play this animation when we press the reload button. So I'm going to save, I'm going to play, and I'm going to reload. You'll see that I actually do play the animation, and I'm playing it 5 times. Now, yours will actually loop indefinitely at this point because we don't have the event that stops the montage or really goes to the finish reload section on our montage because we have this end reload section. And we need to trigger that so that we don't just snap back to idle and we don't get caught in the loop forever. So remember I said we made some events in our base character blueprint that we were going to call, and I went over the reload. I made another event called end repeating reload. If you right click and just type add custom event, you can make an event with whatever name you want. I just called this end repeating reload. You can call it end looping reload. It doesn't matter. We just need an event that we can call from the Anim BP. If we go back to our animation blueprint, this is where we were checking to see if we've hit that arbitrary amount. And if we have, we want to now call this end repeating reload. Assuming your character reference is your blueprint class, you will be able to just drag off of it. Type the name of the function you have, which is end repeating reload, and call it right here. Now in your base character BP, we need to fill out this event. All we're going to do is actually play the same montage we were already playing, but we're going to play it with a different starting section. We're going to actually play it with the end section here. In this case, I was doing it on the other montage that I had already set up before this episode, and my section was called Finish Reload. But if we go to the montage that we created in today's episode, my section is actually called End Reload. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did earlier in the episode, and we're going to make a new play montage using the new value. And let's move this up and out of the way of the rest of our logic. I'm going to send n repeating reload the event we made into this new play montage. So you set up this the same way as before. We call play montage. We pass in our mesh, and then we go to montage to play, and we're going to select the montage that we actually want to play at this point. Since we're ending the reload, we want to play the reload montage, but we only want to play it from the end reload section. We just want to play this portion of it. Go back to your base character BP. For the starting section, remember we didn't specify one for the initial montage because we didn't care. You could technically put in your start reload here, but it's just not necessary. If you don't specify, it will play from the beginning, which is what we wanted. In this case, though, we only want to play from that ending section, so we do need to make sure we get the name correct here. So figure out the name of your section. Mine is end reload for this animation. So for starting section, I type end reload. And then just to really clean up everything, in case you go and use this example further, once this is done, you could do on completed if you want, or just immediately after, we want to reset our reload counter to 0. That will allow us to go about our logic and do it again. Once you have this, you can now compile, save, play your game, and I should be able to shoot my weapon, reload my gun. I will reload 5 times, and then I will go into the end reload. And there we go. Now you can go one step further and you can play around with this value if you want. So if I make it 3 times, you'll see that it does work 3 times. Just so you know, there's no tricks there. I can shoot, I can reload. This will loop 3 times. And we'll go to end reload. This is why Anim Montages are really useful. And they're useful for things other than this as well. Anim Montages actually are the only types of animations in Unreal that by default will support networking with root motion. Regular animations within a state machine will not support root motion by default when networking. There are technically engine changes you can make and ways you could get it to happen, but it's a lot of work. And using a montage for those animations with root motion will make it a lot easier. So they have more uses than just the one I showed you here. This is basically the default example I always think of because this is how Unreal writes their documentation to show the use cases of Anim Montages. But they are useful for other things as well. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope this helped you learn about montages. We'll be covering more of this in the future, and I'll also be incorporating them within the series, so you'll see how they can really fit together with everything that we have, all of our other systems. If this did help you and you enjoyed, guys, please subscribe. It does more for myself in the series than anything else you can do, and I just really appreciate it. I want to give another shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys for everything. I really, really am grateful to you and for everything you've done. Thank you so much. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. It's completely free, and I'd be happy to help you out and fix up any issues you ran into. Like I said, guys, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.